Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're untangling one of the absolute most fascinating paradoxes in political history. We're looking at a time when raw, undeniable military power crashed headfirst into a rigid wall of legal strictures. Imagine this for a second. You're a ruler. You hold absolute military control over vast, sprawling territories. Yet in the eyes of the law, your authority is literally null and void. You are legally a nobody. So how on earth does an absolute ruler navigate a system where having the biggest army just isn't enough to grant legal legitimacy? Well, that, my friends, is the usurper's dilemma.
This whole situation plays out like a high-stakes legal thriller set against the incredibly strict governance rules of the 7th century. And the central question we're digging into is right here on the screen. Can a ruler who takes power by force ever become legitimate? I mean, in a lot of historical empires, it was pretty simple, right? Whoever had the biggest army made the rules. But as we'll see today, the specific system we're examining had incredibly strict, unbreakable laws about how a ruler actually gets the legal right to govern. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 685 CE, or the year 66 in the Hijri calendar. The ruler at the time, Marwan ibn al-Hakim, had officially designated his son, Abdul-Malik, as the next Khalifa. And sure enough, the people of influence in Ash-Sham went ahead and gave him their pledge. But here is the massive catch. This initial claim to rule, it was entirely, 100% legally invalid. Yep, despite his father's decree and despite holding serious military power in his region, Abdul-Malik's authority was considered completely void under the law. So why was it void? Well, the crux of the issue all comes down to something called the bay'ah. Think of the bay'ah kind of like a modern social contract, but with very specific requirements. It's a ruling contract based entirely on mutual consent and free choice between the Muslims and the Caliph. The absolute most crucial point here is that it cannot, under any circumstances, be concluded by force or coercion. It's the specific mechanism that actually grants a ruler their legal authority to govern. So, simply put, if it's forced, it just doesn't count. Right, so why exactly was Abdul-Malik's bay'ah in 685 CE totally invalid? Because at that exact same time, another legitimate leader, Abdullah ibn az-Zubayr, already held the position of Khalifa. He was the legally recognized guy in charge. And in this system of governance, there is a very strict law of one. You can't just say, hey, I have military control over this one province, so I'm starting a rival government. It just doesn't work that way. To give you an idea of just how strictly this law of one was enforced, take a look at this. This powerful hadith explicitly states that if a pledge is taken for two khalifas simultaneously, the latter claim is entirely rejected. In fact, it commands severe action against the second claimant. This really highlights the absolute severe prohibition in Islamic law against having two simultaneous caliphs. There is literally zero room for divided authority or parallel states.
And you know, this wasn't some new concept they just made up on the fly. This historical consensus dates all the way back to the very first Khalifa, Abu Bakr, at the gathering of Banu Saida. When someone actually proposed having two leaders, Abu Bakr firmly shut it down. His reasoning? He argued that having two leaders leads to differing rulings, a divided community, and widespread conflict, or fitna. This law exists specifically to prevent the exact kind of division that Abdul-Malik's parallel claim was causing at the time. Now, because Abdul-Malik claimed power while a legitimate Khalifa already existed, scholars applied some very specific legal jargon to his status. They classified him as al-Mutasallit, or as-Sultan al-Mutagalib. Translated neutrally, this means the usurper, or the dominant sultan. It's a term used to describe someone who seizes and holds power through raw coercion and force, rather than through that valid free choice contract we talked about a minute ago. Let's walk through this timeline together. We start with Marwan's decree in 685 CE, followed immediately by Abdul-Malik claiming power. Now, over the next few years, Abdul-Malik vastly expanded his control. He seized Egypt, Syria, and Iraq by force. But here's the crazy part. Legally speaking, throughout all these massive military victories, he was still just considered a sinful usurper. It wasn't until the death of his rival, Ibn az-Zubayr, a full 7 years later in 692 CE, that the door to legal validation even slightly opened up for him. So that brings us to the ultimate turning point in 692 CE. Abdul-Malik's infamous commander, Hajjaj bin Yusuf, eliminates Abdullah ibn az-Zubayr.
At this point, Abdul-Malik is the undisputed military power. Nobody is challenging his army. But here's the fascinating twist. Raw military dominance alone still did not equal legal legitimacy. Even with his rival dead, Abdul-Malik didn't just automatically become the legal caliphs just because he was the last guy standing with a sword.
Okay, so you might be wondering, how does someone actually escape usurpation then? Well, scholars outlined an incredibly strict legal pathway. There are 3 mandatory conditions that absolutely must be fulfilled for a dominant sultan to transition from a sinful usurper to a legitimate ruler. He needed stable authority, he needed to implement justice, and finally, he needed to receive the bay'ah by free choice. Let's break these down one by one, because honestly, they are vital to understanding how this whole system works.
Condition number 1, stable authority. The dominant sultan can't just be some warlord running around causing chaos. He must effectively secure the lands he's taken over. This means having full, real control over internal security, keeping the people living there safe, and external security, guarding the borders against outside threats. Basically, the region has to actually function as a stable, viable state.
Moving on to condition number 2, implementing justice. And honestly, this one is pretty surprising when you're talking about a military conqueror. A usurper cannot gain legitimacy if he rules through tyranny. No way. The law strictly requires that the ruler implement the rules with justice and benevolence. He actually has to build a good reputation for himself, to the point where he earns the goodwill and satisfaction of the masses. In short, he has to make the people actually want him as their leader.
And that leads us straight to the third and absolutely most crucial condition, mutual consent. Even after he proves he can secure the state and rule justly, the actual contract, the bay'ah, must be given by the local population's representatives entirely by free choice. It cannot be given out of fear or coercion, and it can't just be signed off by the ruler's own military buddies. The people themselves have to willingly, genuinely agree to the contract.
Let's put this into perspective by comparing 2 different historical paths. Take Yazid ibn Muawiyah, for example. His rule was never legally convened because he never managed to secure that free choice and consent from the people. Now, contrast that with Abdul-Malik. While he definitely started out as a usurper, he ultimately established security, he implemented justice, and crucially, he won the bay'ah by actual willing consent. And right here, this is the exact moment that cemented it all. Look at this historical record from Sahih al-Bukhari. People of massive influence in Medina, like Abdullah ibn Umar, finally accepted Abdul-Malik. The text reads, "I gave the bay'ah that I will listen to and obey Abdul-Malik according to Allah's laws." This was not some coerced surrender at sword point. It was a formal, willing, legal acceptance. And from the exact moment this consent was given, Abdul-Malik officially transitioned from a usurper to a legally legitimate caliph.
So this brings us to a pretty profound closing thought. As we look at this final question, we see the enduring, messy tension inherent in governance. How do we balance the practical reality of political stability and military power with the foundational, unbending requirement of the people's mutual consent? The story of Abdul-Malik shows us that while brute force might let you sit on a throne, in a system bound by the rule of law, only the willing choice of the people can actually make you a legitimate ruler. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that balance.